Howdy, howdy. I'm Carlos. Every week I meet up with some friends and chat about my latest research on artificial general intelligence. And we also talk about the broader knowledge based view of the world, partly inspired by Karl Popper and David Deutsch. This week I kind of dug into Godel, Escher, Bach, and Hofstadter's notion of self-reference. That's something that he focuses on heavily. And we compared that idea to David Deutsch's focus in The Beginning of Infinity on the idea of universality. So we kind of compared these two things and kind of asked you which is better. We also compare knowledge, different types of knowledge, and which is more powerful. Knowledge about what to do versus knowledge about what is true. Also a little bit about advice and whether you should ever give it. Also, The Blind Watchmaker is one of my favorite books. That's by Richard Dawkins. And we kind of talk about why I think that's a good guide to AGI research, despite the fact it seems like it's just about evolution. So with that, here's our conversation. The five books, by the way, just to kind of kick that out there, were, of course, The Beginning of Infinity. That's almost like I shouldn't say it because that's sort of everything that I talk about is sort of got that underneath the hood. So it's like, I don't even need to mention this because anyone who knows me already takes that. That's why we know each other. So It's not even a point in recommending it at that point. But then the second one, which I've been revisiting recently, has been The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. And one sentence on that would be that when I read The Selfish Gene, which is obviously his most famous book, I thought that it was going to be sort of an overview of how evolution works from the point of view of this selfish gene perspective. And it is kind of that, but it's really more of a niche book targeted at saying, hey, there's this controversy about whether evolution is focused on the organism, the species, something higher than that, or the gene. And I think it's the gene. And despite the fact that that seems to be nonsensical or problematic in these 10 different ways, I'm going to take you through all those 10 different ways and show you, actually this theory does work, even though first analysis would say it doesn't. So it's sort of a defense of that again and again and again from these different objections. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But then when I read The Blind Watchmaker, I thought, okay, this is where you step back from that particular controversy and say, evolution consists of this genetic, gene-focused view, but also has these other questions like, what is the space of possible organisms? How does evolution navigate that space? How does it navigate that space efficiently? Like, why do arms races, for instance, make evolution go faster? So it's getting at more of these broader issues like what are the basic mechanisms of evolution? What controls the speed of evolution? And questions like that. So I found it to be a lot more fruitful as like an AGI researcher because almost every chapter sort of raised an issue like this, which if you squint just a little bit, you see there's a much more general version of that applies to knowledge creation in general. And therefore, anything that depends on knowledge, whether that's, the speed of how a mind works, the speed of how businesses do well, or whatever, it only takes that little bit of a squint to say, okay, he's really grappling with these core issues. And this is much more than a sentence, obviously, overall. But and my favorite thing about books on evolution, that being, I think, my favorite one in this category, is that evolution is something that we understand now to like a molecular level. And that like depth of like decades of looking at this thing and understanding it from every angle, Darwin solved the big problem. But since then, it's been refined. And again, we have a neo-Darwinian synthesis that he gets even deeper into the thing and a computational view of everything. So we have a lot to say about it and from a very detailed point of view. And that's so cool because for questions in other areas like how minds work, we so don't have that. And so the level of discourse around all those things is so much more bullshittery and vague and controversial, just open-ended really. But, it means that if you were to pick up a book on those things, it's a lot lower signal, I think. Whereas looking at this, you're seeing, they understand this problem really well. And so there's not this bullshittery. and it just takes a little squinting to sort of take those same questions and insights and sort of get a lot of value by applying them to your own area. So that's why I like it. I like something which is hardcore and it's right, and it's not about your thing, but you can apply it to your thing. And I love that, as opposed to somebody who's like, I'm going to talk about your thing specifically, although I have pretty dubious ideas about your thing. I would rather have the good ideas not about my thing than the dubious ones about my thing. My thing being AGI. Anyway, so that's my spiel on that one. And I'll just list the other books real quick, and then we can kind of open it up. But that's the one I've been revisiting recently, so I have the most to say about it. The other 3 books in the 5-book list, Beyond the Beginning of Infinity, The Blind Watchmaker. The other 3 were Knowledge and Decisions by Thomas Sowell, which looks at economies from a knowledge-based view. The 4th one was one of them was
Bach.
Yeah, Godel, Escher, Bach. Thanks for that. Which I haven't read. No one has read it. Even Hofstadter has not read it. But everyone has it. So that's it. But anyway, it's fun to dip into, and like every time I dip into it, I'm like, even if I disagree with it, I'm liking where it's putting the headspace it's putting me in. And I'm thinking, that is an interesting thing to be thinking about, and he's given me some seeds to kind of think about and disagree with, and I'm liking it when I open it up. And then lastly, The Information by James Glick. And he's written a few different books, one on chaos, things for like a pretty wide readership, a little bit pop science. So very, very fun and easy read. But he kind of looks at a bunch of different things in history and from the lens of information. So it says, World War II and Enigma and Turing and genes and sort of saying in all these different places, information is kind of the real thing, or it's at least one big thing that matters, that only recently in the last decades have we seen, information is the thing that's happening there. It isn't just biology. It isn't just engineering. There's this other thing that we should be thinking about. And so I think that he goes through like 15 different chapters. Like one of the fun ones, by the way, is about like African drumming and saying like, if you try to communicate in Africa in the jungle across long distances, they use drums to do it, kind of like Morse code a little bit. But that has its own challenges. And, if I try to say a word over a long distance, you might not hear it quite right. And plus I can only make a few sounds with the drums. So I have to communicate something to you that's error resistant. How do I do that? And they, nobody was thinking in those terms, but they evolved toward a system of communication with these drums that was error tolerant and so on. And kind of, again, that's a lens on that activity that we have now that you wouldn't have had maybe 100 years ago. So that's kind of showing you that lens applies to all these different places and really everywhere that humans do anything. You can take this lens and it's useful. So anyway, those 5 books are the thing I kind of put in this recent thread that I thought was kind of fun. And each of them has its own strength, with obviously the David Deutsch books taking a top spot. But anyway, I'll leave it there. We can kind of open it up. Any of those spark interest?
Yeah, you definitely sold me on The Blind Watchmaker. I'm very interested now.
Yeah, it's great. It's the runt of the litter or something. I don't know what you would call it. The hidden stepchild of the selfish gene, but it's good.
Did you say that no one has read Godel, Escher, Bach because no one ever gets through it and people give up along the way or something?
Yeah, and then also, I guess it's true of any book that by the time you do reach the end, you've forgotten no, but I really mean that. I think it's such a big book that you always hear like, I haven't, there's always a little bit of an apology.
Right.
So
right. Okay. Gotcha.
But then again, some people will say that you should never finish a book cover to cover. I think David Deutsch has kind of said something like that. Like, I almost never do that.
Right.
He was saying.
Right. I was going to brag a bit and say I have read that one cover to cover. It was my 2020 nothing else to do pandemic read that summer. So that was fun.
Nice. Well, you're now tasked. Now that you're going to flex like that, you have to give me an impromptu, just amazing speech on it. Go.
I mean, Instead of giving you a speech on Godel, Escher, Bach, something I find very interesting that is a very like interesting mystery to me is that the first time I read Beginning of Infinity, I kind of did not get it. Like compared to the second time I read it, now a big chunk of my life revolves around that book where I try to like, it has this, as we've said, super deep impact. And it's the same thing with the YouTube video, The Fun Criterion, where Lily Tannett interviews David Deutsch. The first time I saw that, I was like, this is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Like, and I don't, like, sure, it's nice when things are fun, but now also a bunch of my life revolves around that. Like, I take the fun criterion very seriously. And I don't know why, but I think it's interesting, maybe revealing that I read the beginning of Infinity for the first time in 2018, 2019, because I think I was like interested in the multiverse stuff. And then I did not really get it. I was like, this is cool. I really like that. I really like what he was saying about explanations. I think that what's funny is that the thing that I remember the most from my first read was the Star Trek example of like how invisibility would never work because like if there's a photon, it has to hit something. And so if you're invisible, you would not be able to see anything because photons would pass through you. And if you were able to see something, then whatever the photon was hitting to get absorbed, that thing would cast a shadow. So invisibility explained like it normally is a bad explanation. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. But like the rest of it, I was like, oh, this is not as interesting as this like fun trivia question thing that I was prepared to bring up at a party to out nerd other people. Anyway,
There is a critique of that, by the way.
Okay,
Just a
go
quick
for it.
thing,
I'm
just to say,
curious.
like
Yeah.
at Anduril, for instance, they said that we take the photon, it hits a sensor, but then we like project on a screen. So we did absorb the light, but we
Gotcha.
also emitted some light. So
Right. Yeah, that's a good workaround. That makes sense. Um, but okay, so getting slightly more serious, I think the problem at the time was that I was not aware of the problems of epistemology. I basically did not really take epistemology seriously. I can't remember. It's so hard to remember after you've gone through the Popperian transformation that has on your life of like how you even operated before. Um, so I can't remember if I thought like it's definitely was inductive-ish that you like read from the Book of Nature type deal, I guess. Um, but anyway, then I read Gödel, Escher, Bach cover to cover in 2020. And I think because that book, if you read the whole thing, like it forces you to spend so much time with the problems of epistemology and self-reference and how like axiomatic closed systems like can't ever get to the heart of like whatever it is that humans are doing, and just like it gets you so interested in this like really, really deep problem that I was like, okay, there's really something here that's relevant, not just that it's interesting, but it's also relevant to like my job because I was getting into like AI research at the time. So anyway, long story short, 2 years later, I read The Beginning of Infinity for the second time in 2022, and I will never forget this experience. I was like every day, because I listen to audiobooks when I'm commuting. So every day, right as I come back from home after my job, I was like, holy shit, this book is like serious. This is like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates level of thinking. Anyway, and so that is like my story of how um, I went down the uh, what is it? What does Alice go through? The Looking Glass? No, that's the sequel. The Rabbit Hole?
Rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
down the or yeah, of course. Um, anyway, so that's kind of, I don't know if that gives more branching off points for other people, but I'll leave it at that for now. That's kind of how I went down the rabbit hole.
by the way, just as a stupid word play that I guess I always think of in this context, Gaurav mentioned getting into the history of anti-Semitism and so on. And so you said you're going down the rabbit hole. I wonder if you guys can complete
Mhm.
the wordplay. Going down the rabbi hole.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can cut that.
I wouldn't like to go down there.
Nice. Yeah, I always wonder. I feel like Godel, Escher, Bach, is referenced in the beginning of Infinity. So you have that
Right.
relationship, and then reading the two of them, you can kind of see some similarities, differences, and especially a difference in focus in terms of, like, one thing I like to say is David Deutsch loves universality, Douglas Hofstadter loves self-reference.
Yeah.
These are quite different things.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm not sure about. So, are you talking about universality and then self? When you said self-referencing, are you talking about the self-similarity concept, or is it different?
Oh, kind of. I think that one of the high-level ways of contrasting the two books and kind of which ideas they circle around and continuously refer to and think are important and drive the questions. I think for Douglas Hofstadter, there's this idea of a strange loop of self-reference. Once a thing is looking back at itself and modeling itself, something special begins to happen. And so that's the phenomenon that, again, you want to understand from these 20 different perspectives. And so he looks at that from formal systems, like mathematical systems that look back in on themselves, and on and on, or like cameras that look at their screen and you have a closed loop there with an infinite hallway. These seem like special things. And so that's kind of like the attractor that the book is going around. Whereas with Deutsch's books, or The Beginning of Infinity, that is not at all the central concept or the thing that it's orbiting around. It says instead, look at something like Turing completeness and the idea that there's a level which you can reach that suddenly whatever is possible, you can just do all of that. And there's no like jumping harder, going beyond that. So once you've reached that level, it's all open to you. And there's something special about making that transition, this jump to universality, which is one of the chapters. And I think the critique that he offers is something like, if the ability to self-reference is a special case of the ability to refer to anything, and the ability to sort of have self-awareness or self-understanding is just, again, a byproduct of being able to understand anything. And so that's the thing that you really want. And it's trivial to like have a self-model, actually, or to recognize yourself. So I think that's a way of saying, hey, like the core concept of Gödel, Escher, Bach is very fruitful and it's interesting and it takes you around these concepts. But then if you instead say, hey, the beginning of infinity says universality is this thing, is this key concept, you can then take that back to Gödel, Escher, Bach and say, hey, everything you said, I'm going to assume that it's wrong now because it was kind of orbiting around the wrong concept. What if I switch out this other concept of universality? Do I get a different lens on it? Do I take the idea further? Do I see where you took a wrong turn? And so you can reread the book with this new core concept that's critical and different, and pushes it, I think, further. But that's one thing you can do anyway.
For sure. Like I think for me, like the biggest thing was that this book, the biggest gain was that I was seeing errors in my thinking that I never saw, that I never thought I had. I thought I was this, the ideas that I had were, I mean, not all were wrong, but quite a few I thought were right, but they were wrong, and it came about only because of this revisiting those ideas with this now concept of universality, error correction, and that approach.
I think when I first read and got The Beginning of Infinity, because I think it's a common experience to read it and not quite get it at first, or if you open
I
it.
really wonder why that is. But anyway, continue. But I really wonder why that is.
But for me, that wasn't the case. And it could be because my friend, I was talking to somebody else about this, and he said, I read The Fabric of Reality first for some reason. I don't know how that. And then from there, once I had like those four strands sort of like, under, like a little bit, then like Beginning of Infinity was like an extension, which, and then now like the third book, which I don't know if somebody knows, please tell me when it's coming. I need to plan my life around it. Is irrationality, and I totally anticipate. my challenge to myself is I'm trying to like write down ideas that I think David will cover in his next book on irrationality. He throws out things in his interviews, I think, that are based on, he's been clearly working on that book for 10 years now. So there must be nuggets that he's throwing out here and there on Twitter. He said so, I think, that he tests certain things on Twitter to see the response and find errors in his own thinking, which is, anyway, that was a little thing. Yeah, so I think that could be the thing. Could be Fabric of Reality is more technical, so you can spend some time there. Get your, it's like level 1, you finish Fabric of Reality. Level 2 is Beginning of Infinity, and then level 3 would be hopefully the next book.
Interesting. And you guys, you didn't, when you say you didn't get it, you mean like it wasn't impactful at all, or like you just didn't understand it, or some combination of that?
I don't think I understood. Like I don't think I understood that, like framing, like thinking in terms of problems and error correction and unlimited progress will offer solutions to so many of the problems that, like, just like that. And I didn't realize that that was the case. Like it's yeah. Like for example, um, I used to think that even after I had read Beginning of Infinity the first time, that we might want to say have less children in general, because that might, help with a bunch of problems of not enough resources to go around. But if you really get what he's saying in Beginning of Infinity, that's just totally, you see that that's the wrong way to approach the problem.
Yeah,
and I didn't understand.
Interesting. I read the Beginning of Infinity for the first time this year. It's almost been a year, so I read it January 8th. Well, no, it was introduced to David Deutsch on January 8th, and I got the book soon after, like a week later. And I was like immediately captured by the book, and continue to be. Yeah,
You had a prepared mind.
apparently. And also I had access to YouTube. So it's great to have Brett Hall, for example, having the breakdown of every one of the chapters. I had that immediately accessible. I'm not sure if you guys read the book before, those types of resources
That might,
existed. Yeah. Because I could immediately see that. I could see all the podcasts that David Deutsch has done. So, that helps me fall into it.
I think when I first read it, it's not so much that it's incomprehensible or something, but I think anytime you pick up a book, there's this question of, is this any good? And you maybe have familiarity with pop sci books that are a bit superficial, and you have this sort of checklist of ways in which books prove to be boring and whatever. So you're like, is this one of those? Is kind of the question as any reader picking it up. And so I think when I first picked it up, it wasn't clear, like, oh, this is, is this one of those bad books that are kind of boring, or is it a really good book? Some books I think grab you immediately, and because maybe you have already looked around a field and you've seen that people kind of are a bit wishy-washy or not that good, and you see something like, oh, this clearly is head and shoulders above those. It's asking exactly the questions I had in mind already and answering them, or at least getting the questions right and putting them sharply. Like, okay, like you can see when somebody puts together a good sentence, like they're on it. They aren't GPTing their way, more or less, to anything plausible. They're just getting it, and you're like, yes, I want the next page. So I don't know if that hit me in the same way, if I had the same set of questions that it made the book seem like the answer to those questions. But I think somewhere along the way, in the middle, I kind of skipped around and found something I liked, and then just kind of what's this like, oh, okay, I like this part. Let me see what preceded that part, and then after a little bit of that, I was like, let me just start it again, and it's now convinced me it isn't one of those other books.
Nice.
So I think that was my experience.
I may have had the benefit of I don't like to read, so I don't read a lot of other books. I mean, I've just not read. I've never read any of these other books in this field of like Godel, Escher, Bach. I know people talk about it. I've never been interested in reading it, and anything like that. So I exclusively wanted to read chapter 14 of The Beginning of Infinity, which is about flowers, and that's where I started. I read that chapter, and then I decided to read the rest of the book, and I guess, I don't know, some benefit. I didn't have any of the judgment, or I didn't have any previous ideas about similar subjects. So I just kind of read it fresh.
Same for me. My last physics academic or idea exposure was in high school
Yeah.
in India. Yeah.
I think one thing that's interesting to me is, in this case, you approach the book through a particular lens of aesthetics and seeing that this book addresses that in a direct way at one part of it, and then you get the rest as sort of, I like to say, collateral knowledge instead of collateral damage. So that's cool. I think that I don't know if I had as much a thing like that. I found out about it from Sam Harris. It was on his website, and I often say how ironic it is that I found out about it from Sam Harris, read the book, and then saw 2 years later he interviewed Deutsch, and he hadn't read the book yet. Apologize, man. I got this from you.
Yeah.
But I think it is interesting, the general phenomenon of reading a book in your own way. I guess we all can't help but do that in the sense that we have our own kind of library of concepts and we're parsing the book in our way. But even beyond that, having your own sort of lens, I think, is interesting. And that's kind of one reason why I like working on AGI. There are many reasons I like it, but one of the interesting things I like about it is that it's this sort of rich set of problems. And, I have questions about this and that, and, what is universality this, and variation selection that. So I have this thing, and it's like my little pet thing. And I can put on those glasses and look at a book like The Blind Watchmaker or whatever. And I'm reading it in a way that I think, I don't know if this sounds egotistical or something, or I want my special snowflake flower or whatever. But I think nobody else is reading the book this way.
Yeah.
And asking this question at that time, or reading that sentence and having this response to it. And that nobody else could have that, because it's all this years of my own whatever that I'm like, I'm reading the book in this way. And that's true for the Thomas Sowell thing and whatever book I'm reading. Like, they didn't write it for me, for my problem. They couldn't predict what that is. So it's fun. I guess it makes me feel more special to sort of have this set of interest that is on the side. And then you pick up that book and you put it into your mental workshop with your mental tools. And then you start breaking it apart with your mental things and using it for your projects. This is fun. So I think that's like an interesting, aside from anything else about the quality of a particular book, it's just fun having your own little mental workshop and problems. Because it's a very creative way to read something. I almost don't like reading sometimes if I'm not like prepared to, like, if my computer isn't in front of me and I can't write down my thoughts as I go, I'm almost like, okay, there's no point in listening to this right now, because I want to be reacting and writing as I'm listening to a strong book that I want to interact with in that way. If it's like a novel or something, it's separate. I can just enjoy that separately. But for the more active thing with the Dawkins book, I'm like, I need to be taking notes while I do this, and I'm having my own AGI flavored experience as I go.
That's very cool. I like this idea of you being like, every time you read a book, or if you're reading a book, it's like a special reading. Your perspective is your own, and you're bringing a lot to the table with that special individual perspective. And it kind of counteracts the opposite idea, which might be implied, that you want to read a book to actually get what the book is literally saying. And the book has some true knowledge that you have to exactly copy into your mind or something like that. You counteract that type of thing, and you have your own special flavor to everything that you read. I like it.
Yeah, obviously we took a different attack to the beginning of Infinity. I did not start with the aesthetics chapter. If anything, I would say it's the one that I have focused on least. So, a book for all seasons, maybe.
Yeah.
Nice.
I got a question about Godel, Escher, and Bach. Is the book is it equally segmented into Escher and Bach and Godel? Is it like 1/3 each topic, or each?
The subtitle is An Eternal Golden Braid. So it's like the fabric of reality in that sense of bringing lots of things together.
Uh-huh.
Ali was vigorously shaking his head no, as you were saying. It was all neatly separated and organized.
Yeah, he jumps around from from Godel to Bach to Godel to Escher. For me, I think Bach is the least. I don't know if he really truly belongs in that book in the sense that, oh yeah, maybe he does. I shouldn't say that. But like Godel's very much, I think, I would say at the center, and then it's Escher, and then it's Bach. But yeah.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah, carry on. I have another question that I've been thinking about, but I want to leave that for a second if you have other thoughts there.
So I'm also, I don't want to stray from the outline that you have for these chats, but I can't help but like, so I've been reading If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. It's this book by Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nate Soares about if you build very, very powerful AI, it'll basically kill everyone. And anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there as like, if we have time, we can get to it, of like why, when you approach it through a Popperian lens, I've been thinking about, okay, what about these arguments don't work and what about them do work and stuff like that. But anyway, I don't have to talk about it right now. We can jump to your thing, but we can get to it if we have time or not.
Let's do it.
I think Brett has just so you know, I wanted to throw it out there that Brett has a full hour and a half long thing on it. Like he made a couple of presentations on the whole. That's my only exposure. I haven't directly read that paper or anything.
Oh, I see. Okay, so Brett has a series. I should definitely listen to that. Yeah. So okay. So I think the main thing to talk about with the relevance to this discussion of that book is like, if you kind of view intelligence as this optimization process, which I think is the core mistake. But if you kind of grant that okay, intelligence is doing this optimization, hill climbing thing, and anything that gets in the way of that optimization goes away because intelligence is very powerful, and that the direction of the intelligence isn't creatively changing. It's like you learn these goals, and you learn these goals that are arbitrary. For example, for humans, they bring up this example of like, we like artificial sugar packets that are made of sucralose, but even though evolutionarily this makes no sense because it doesn't even have calories, it's not helping in any way, but it has like, it reacts with our taste buds in a way that we like. So we produce like enormous amounts of this stuff. And it paints this picture of like, the goals aren't actually objective. They're not making progress. It's just like you kind of like what you like type thing. And intelligence is optimizing towards this thing that it likes what it likes, and everything in the way is going to get swept away. Then, you're obviously in this like really crappy situation where the intelligence meter on the super intelligence is 1,000, and for us it's like 0.5, and so we're just screwed. But anyway, I think if you let go of these like kind of 2 or 3 assumptions of intelligence is not a pure optimization process, it's this conjecture criticism thing, and that the goals aren't solid, but they evolve. The goals also evolve as we figure out what goals are better. Then this kind of thing doesn't happen.
So I think this is an area where the idea of universality is just so interesting, because if you say, hey, you can think anything and converge on anything, this has a few different consequences. One of them is that if you can think anything and whatever, then there's no idea that you have that can't be fixed and corrected if it's
right.
wrong. Also means that there's no limit beyond which you're just screwed. That you can whatever the thing is that is thinkable, you can think it. So, either nobody can think about this thing because it's uncomputable. It's a number that's infinitely long and whatever, and random digits. So like, doesn't matter if you're an alien or a super AI, just that's inaccessible to anybody. Or we can have it too, and the aliens and whatever. So we're all equal in what we can do. So I think this core idea of universality is interesting because then the argument would be, hey, this other thing can think of anything, but humans cannot. But that argument becomes a little bit awkward for anybody who wants to say where the limits actually are. Because if you point to anything that, like the sugar thing, whatever, like we're not optimizing for sugar or whatever, we're optimizing for like human enjoyment. And as soon as we can get that same thing digitally, then we'll just do it digitally and with no molecules or whatever. And if you think that human enjoyment or whatever is a irrelevant thing, then I'd say that's a wrong idea. So anyway, I think universality is such a good thing, and it centers the conversation where it should be, which is like, do we have like what sort of universality matters? The ability to think anything, to generate any idea, have ideas on that. And then once you've established what you think the type of universality that matters for making a mind, of the human type or superhuman type or whatever, just the most powerful type, the top shelf intelligence type. Whatever that is, that's question number one. And then question two is, okay, do LLMs have it? Do humans have it? Do animals have it? And all these other questions about like, hey, can you fix this particular error? Or, is there something baked into our genes that we can just never escape? Those are all sub-questions of those other two questions. What form of universality matters? And like, do we have the relevant thing?
And I think another interesting question is whether or not moral progress or morality at all is a form of knowledge, or is it at all related to knowledge? So if you have a general intelligence that can improve anything, that requires intelligence, but for some reason can't improve its morality or can't progress morally, you would have to show that morality is somehow completely separated from knowledge or from intelligence or whatever. And I think that's just fundamentally wrong, right? So if you have a generally intelligent super AI system, it should also be able to improve its morality.
Yeah. And I think these all get to the heart of the arguments with the book, and that's where I think the morality thing is really at the center, because one of the assumptions is that preferences are totally arbitrary and they're not building on moral knowledge. So this is where you get like and then you pair that with the optimizer thing, and it becomes really bad in the sense that like, even if your preference is not that bad, like let's say your preference is like, I just want to make even one paperclip, right, as opposed to like a bazillion paperclips, because with the optimization perspective, you want the probability of you making that paper like 99.99999. You basically wipe out humans just in case, because they might take away one of the nines at the end, because if a human does something silly, I don't know, like eat your paperclip, you don't want to risk thing. So you are very conservative. Anyway. But yeah, let's get back to the other books. I think that's
cool. By the way, I think one thing that's very interesting, the highest level way to describe it is just the idea of comparative epistemology, like comparing different knowledge creating systems and seeing how they're different. Because I think they're all united in the sense that they all create new things and have some measure of what's good and what's bad, and can therefore try stuff and engage in trial and error. So trial and error type systems, all share trial and error. So, and so they got both of those in common, but then the way they go about each of those steps is wildly different. And so that's where the comparison becomes really interesting. How does this business compare to that one? Why is Blue Origin slower as a rocket company than SpaceX at developing rockets? Mm-hmm. They have presumably a huge overlap in what their ideas about the world are and what is good, and yet one of them seems to be moving faster. Are we wrong about that? Is it the case that SpaceX is actually moving more slow or in a different way, and Blue Origin is going to be much faster in some larger sense? These are kind of questions that are interesting, but you can even widen that to like, how do the human knowledge creation processes compare to the processes of biological evolution, which takes millions of years to discover things and probably could never do rockets. So those are kind of interesting comparisons to make. So I often, in my kind of AGI type research, will often be bouncing between what seem like these quite different systems that shouldn't be talked about in the same sentence, like evolution machine learning, humans, animals, all these things, LLMs. And one of the things I think is interesting is when two systems seem to be doing the same thing. Like if you look at an LLM producing text and a human producing text, they seem similar, at least in they're both producing grammatical text. Interesting. Or when you see like somebody hiding, like if they were to like bury something underground and you see a squirrel also burying something underground. Okay, it seems like they're doing the same kind of thing. So if you didn't know better, you'd say, I think they are doing the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They're digging something and putting it there for a reason. Like they don't want people to get it. And they're like, totally makes sense to me that you would want to do that. And it becomes a shock when you see, oh shit, they were not doing the same thing. The squirrel will try to bury the nut under concrete and think that it did a fine job, despite the fact it just scratched the concrete and achieved nothing. And like, okay, that surprises me. Or when you ask an LLM, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And then you come back tomorrow and its answers are totally different. You're like, oh, I would have expected it if you had a strong belief, it would carry over day to day. Not so. Okay, so you're bullshitting me. Or you have, a trillion internal personalities. Like you're not like me. I thought you were like me because whenever I talk to you normally, you were like me. But as soon as I do this weird thing where I interact with you in a way that I don't usually interact with humans, I'm seeing that your responses are wildly countering what I would think is normal. And so that's a shock because there's this area where there's a similarity superficially, but the actual underlying machinery is different. And it requires you sort of engineering this weird situation to see the difference. And say, when you put everybody on concrete, the human realizes that this digging operation is not going to plan, but the squirrel is happy just to dig at the ground and it's fine. Okay, we are not doing the same kind of thing. So that's just a general point that I think is kind of interesting, especially in the context of, I guess in the context of AI safety, the question is, hey, it seems like we're really good at making progress. And it seems like AIs can make a lot of progress. Maybe we're doing the same kind of thing. And therefore, maybe we should treat it almost like an adversary, who's accelerating its hardware. But if we're not doing the same kind of thing, then suddenly I think your worries would recede and say like, okay, well, yeah, I don't. It's powerful, and I don't want to give any powerful system or unpredictable system, too much power because it might surprise me. Mm-hmm. Just the same way that you might not want to like crack a bullwhip if you don't know where that tip of the whip that's going supersonic, is it going to crack away from you or is it going to be next to your head?
Right.
Like, I'm not so confident that I know where that's going to be when it gets really fast. So I'm not going to crack that whip just yet because it might hit me. This applies to all technology, but doesn't lead to necessarily doesn't have the same terrifying quality. You're just like, well, I'm going to study how whips work before I start cracking it.
Right. I've got a question about the comparative epistemology. This is something I brought up even last week, and I've been thinking about it a lot since. I mentioned that I think that alternatives, considering what an alternative is a fundamental part of the problem-solving thing that we can do as humans, as separate from just making guesses and separate from selecting the guesses, categorizing the guesses. So, for example, if we can understand when things are the same or when they're different, and we have pretty interesting and we have interesting criteria for determining if humans are doing the same thing as AGI or as AI systems, LLMs. And we have to update our criteria for that, and it has to become more subtle as the technology improves. And we have to be the ones who have the criteria for determining if they are the same type of systems. And even when we're doing error correction or when we're creating new knowledge, if we have multiple different things addressing the same problem, we have to determine that they are multiple different things addressing the same problem, rather than just different things that are not addressing the same problem. Or we have to determine whether there are different guesses that are exactly the same guess, just stated in different words. We have to have all those different distinctions, and that makes it easier for us to error correct. And I think with evolution, we don't have this sort of aggregation. We don't have this sort of system for determining when different things are actually variations of each other, or when different things are actually alternative rival theories. But we, as human knowledge creators, we do have that ability to set things and determine when they are the same, or when they're different, or when they're addressing the same problem. And it makes it easier for us to select. So anyway, I just want to throw that out and kind of get your idea from that, Carlos, because I remember you were kind of questioning why I even thought of that as a separate process.
Well, I guess Popper classically has this idea of you start with a problem situation,
Yep.
and my remembering of it was, you have this mix of ideas and problems and whatever, things you want to work on, and then that causes you to try some stuff, and then of all those things that you just came up with, see which ones are good, keep those, get rid of the rest, and now you find yourself in a new situation where you've tried some stuff and you've seen see what works. And so my take on that was that if you want to look at this, I had my own questions about that process. Like, is it missing any steps, or can any of those steps be removed? What is the role of each of those steps? And I think where I came away from that was, you need a way of coming up with new ideas. Otherwise, you can't make better ideas. So, like, any process has to have a source of novelty if we're going to talk about progress at all. So that's number one, a one sentence proof about the necessity of that thing. What about the error correction process, or the comparison of the things you came up with? And then there's a argument for that, which is like, if you don't get rid of the crappy stuff, it's going to consume your resources, and eventually all of them, more or less, so that the good ideas will will consume only an exponentially decreasing part of your resources. So like you came up with the right idea, you're Einstein, you had relativity, but you only have so many hours in the day, and you have a bunch of other crappy ideas taking your time. So you never quite get to the point where you write the paper on that good idea. And nobody ever learns about it. So that's not good. So you need a way of getting rid of the trash so you can focus on the good stuff. Okay, QED on that one. That one seems solid. Where I ran into a question was with the first and last parts of that process, where I thought, okay, Popper says you need a problem, or you have some kind of situation. But that doesn't seem to be the case for evolution, where, if you look in Darwin's writing, there's no mention of that necessarily. I assume. I haven't actually read The Origin of Species. I'm a bad researcher. But but you hear about variation and selection. You only hear about two things. So why is Popper mentioning four or three different types of things? Is that thing actually necessary? So I thought, I guess it's not necessary. It's just really useful and really speeds things up. And so if you have a source of novelty, you're just trying anything, and then you keep what survives. Okay, you can figure stuff out. And if you run that for a few million years, a few billion years, stuff that works will come out of the woodwork, and it's fine. So that will get you progress. However, it's a hell of a lot faster if instead of just tweaking things at random, you tweak things that are actually relevant. The hard part is you have to know what's relevant. And so I think that's what you were talking about, Zachary, which is, if I have 10 million ideas in my head, which ones should I use right now, given that we're talking about Popper? I probably shouldn't be thinking about, dolphins and Mars and, can dolphins swim on Mars? That's a sentence I could come up with next, but this is not particularly well suited to pushing forward the conversation right here. And yet it could occur to me, and that's what evolution does. That's a case where, by the way, that I mentioned earlier, that you look at different systems and they seem like they're doing the same kind of thing in some ways. You could say human designers come up with really cool stuff. Evolution has come up with cool stuff. Maybe they're doing the same kind of thing. And it's not until you sit down and see how long it took evolution to come up with the things it did that you see, oh man, evolution is the stupidest thing. Like, it made progress, but it's the worst possible way to do it. It's, if you put it into human terms, you see that and you go, wow, that's dumb. Like, who on earth would hire someone who just says, I don't know, I just started flipping bits in the code base to see, I'm a developer. That's what I do. You're like, you took our gigabyte worth of business stuff and you just started changing individual bits. get the hell out of here. You're a menace. But that's what evolution is doing. And it only works if you wait long enough. So obviously, we see that as dumb. And we obviously see it's much better if you can focus on what's relevant, which requires a sophisticated machinery to know which ideas are relevant, both in terms of like things worth trying, but also what is the right measure of whether I've succeeded. Like if you come up with bad ideas like dolphins on Mars, that's not going to be a very good candidate solution. But also if you say like, hey, I came up with an idea, would it help dolphins swim on Mars? This is all. Now we're not talking about which idea you came up with to help the problem. We're asking, is the solution that you came up with any good? And this is a horrible measure of whether your idea is good. And it would kill all your good ideas about how to improve your business, whatever. That's the horrible metric. So on both sides, you want to have relevant ideas. So that's kind of how I think about it. And so coming back to your point, Zachary, you're kind of saying like, hey, I think that traditionally we talk about only one of these things, but actually we need to consider multiple. That's exactly the kind of thing that the kind of question that I was asking as well. But I think I landed maybe in a different place than you, or a different emphasis, or a different way of putting it. But I wonder what you think of that spiel.
I'm fully on board with this. I'm thinking of specifically what would be necessary to have a mind that is possible to solve all problems, or a general intelligence, essentially. And I think that the categorization is necessary for a general intelligence. It is not necessary for any progress. Evolution doesn't categorize things separately. And I also think that there's a hidden categorization. So when you say, let's say, us human intelligences, we can select between rival theories, I don't think that it would be proper to say that biology is selecting between rival theories. Now, I might be talking weirdly about this, but in biology, you're either killing one individual that has the genes or whatever, or you're not killing that individual before it replicates or before it reproduces, and that gene then replicates. This is an individual choice at a time, and that is not analogous to choosing the best between multiple. So I think it's more analogous to say, like, if you have a theory, you generate a theory, and then you determine if that theory is true or not. If it's not true, you select against it. If it is true, you keep it. That is the regular selection without any comparison. But then if you have multiple theories, and then you say one is better than the other, then you can compare the two and choose the one that is better. So you already have this sort of hidden criteria for selecting or for determining that two theories are rival theories, if you are comparing rival theories, of course.
This makes me think of a central question in AGI and everything else, which is that there are different kinds of knowledge, some of which are much, much more powerful than others. And so in genes, everything really is at the bottom level is just saying, hey, make this protein in this shape.
Yeah.
So imagine if you were only allowed to speak in those terms. It's difficult. Like everything, if you say anything other than protein, I'm just going to forget. I'm not going to listen to it. So this is a very constrained language to affect the world and whatever. And it's also not about what's true of reality. It just says, do this thing. And of course, a treatise that tells you, do this in this situation and do this in this situation can be very useful. And all the genome is basically that. And self-help books are, again, basically that. Do this thing, it will help you. But it's interesting when you have instead a statement not about what to do, but about what is true. And in a way, that's what, like, one reason why I like the beginning of Infinity, because it's more about what is true, and then it ends up affecting what you do, but not because it told you what to do. And right. And so it can be much more general knowledge. And in particular, you mentioned that if you have a comparison to make, it matters whether you're talking about comparisons of ideas about what to do, in which case you're like, you can only test which one works better in some situation. Whereas if you talk about what's true, well, now, like, even before you try this idea out and test its usefulness, you can say like, oh, it's not true. And you can make that assessment in general by, like, in the logical case, by just referring to other ideas in your head. If I say, hey, pigs can fly, and I'm like, well, no, they can't. I have another thought in my head that says pigs can't fly. That, or like only things with wings can fly, let's say. And pigs are a thing that don't have wings, therefore, blah, blah, blah. So you can have this other set of little simple statements that strung together imply this other thing. There's no way of implying anything when you just say, do this, do that, make this protein. Like the relationship between the ideas isn't there. So by virtue of having these logical ideas that allow you to perform this operation we call deduction, like that gives you all this, a lot of bang for your buck. Like you just have that idea sitting in your head, and on any given day, apply it to some new situation. The idea that you have to have wings to fly, I've applied today to saying pigs can't fly. And if you say they can, you're wrong. And then tomorrow I apply to something else. I say, oh, that thing has wings. I wonder if it can fly. Probably can. And so I'll get into it. I'll get into the plane because it has wings. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure you need those to fly. Oh, that, or the next day, hey, that plane on the runway has its wings blown off. I'm not going to fly on that. These sound simple to us, but like if you were like a dog, you would not be making the same assessments. Mm-hmm. So like we don't appreciate how rich that knowledge is and how much use we make of it.
The dog only knows what to do.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not.
It'll follow the food to the plane without the wings. It doesn't know anything about the wings. Yeah, yeah. You're right.
I
love that sentence, by the way. Yeah. What you said, I was making a note earlier when you said what to do versus what is true. I think that's really, it makes complete sense. It also has a tangent in culture where in Indian culture, there's a lot of, there's a common practice of just, randomly throwing advice in any conversation to your family, to your friends. I guess it's a pretty wide culture, and that's very dangerous. And the first time David talked about this idea that giving advice is not a good relationship to have, I didn't quite. I sort of intuitively, I was enamored by him, so I was like, yeah, it must be true. But I think I understand. It's in the similar context. Like advice is just like what to do, but instead, I would rather just like answer questions about like what is true, and then that's more useful for the other person versus making them dependent on like ask me a question, I'll tell you what to do, and then you go away do that, versus focusing on knowing what is true.
I would push back on that idea of advice is a bad thing to do, or at least how I think about it. Mm-hmm. I think this is my interpretation of that, which is that obviously if somebody says, I think you have knowledge that would be useful to me, could you give me some? Like you're going to want to do something with roughly that shape. I guess the question is, okay, but there are bad versions of that and good versions of that. So what's the line of demarcation, to use a very Popperian term, between good advice or a good relationship of advice and bad one? And my version of that, unless you want to give your version first.
No, go ahead, please.
My version of that is something like the right decision for you at a given moment will depend on many things. And so I guess the usual way of putting that is you have context that I don't have. I can't have the whole thing. I don't know what you enjoy at a gut level that you've never told anyone, that you like drawing and you don't like this, despite everything about society thinks you should like this other thing. I don't know all that. And so there's going to be things which I'm ignorant of. And so I have this fatal ignorance on my side. So that's the broader context of things to make a point about. So the ultimate decision needs to be informed by the best knowledge available, some of which only you have. So that's number one. However, I have things in my head that you don't have. So I'll try to come up with some of them and I'll try to put them in your head. And these can take a few different forms. One of them is ideas about what you could do that you might not previously have had. Hey, this person is over here. Talk to them. This book exists. Maybe read that. So I can provide possible solutions or parts of solutions. I can also provide potential measures of their success. This is, again, the variation selection side of things. I can give you some new ideas. I can maybe also help you see whether something has a problem with it. Hey, that idea doesn't sound good for this reason. That doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you some filters. So I would say you can help somebody with generation and filtering, but ultimately theirs is the decision, because they're going to have 99% of the thing that matters probably isn't in your head. It's only in theirs.
Yeah, for me, like the reason that resonated really well was because I think all problems, I think I agree with David when he says that all problems are parochial. And if knowledge creation begins with problems, then unless I, before giving advice, I think this whole thing of like not having a good relationship tells me that I should be more. It just is like a reminder to me that I need to be more careful before offering advice. I should have a theory of at least a good theory, a positive theory that I understand the problem context well enough to be able to advise. Otherwise, I refrain from like it's just becoming like less casual about throwing advice without really knowing the problem situation, because I might cause harm to someone without knowing their problem situation by telling them what to do.
I think part of it is that, like, imagine, I guess there's a trick here in that, like, if you provide ideas, like, part of it is how the recipient will take them, I guess. If somebody is like inherently like very authoritarian or respecting authority too much and treats you as an authority, then I guess that's something to be aware of, and just say like, dude, I know people are just going to go out and do it, even if it's going to kill them. And so I just can't. My audience is taking this dynamite, and they're just lighting it. Come on, man! You got to look at the instructions first. Have you considered whether you should light the dynamite? If there's any other fuel around and sparks happening all around you, don't light the dynamite, despite the fact that my environment doesn't have all these sparks, so I can use the dynamite safely and carry it around. So I guess there's to be wary of that, people uncritically taking your ideas and applying them. But I think that's maybe something that happens more when somebody has a few experiences like that. I guess I don't have enough Twitter followers or whatever to have this experience of like somebody saying, I did what you said and then my family died. I'm like, oh shit. Well, okay, I got to be more careful in the future. But yeah, I think if people had the, I guess it's about both sides, like the person offering the ideas and the person taking the ideas. If everybody's super critical, then I'm not sure that there's the same dangers.
Sure.
By the way, there's a good, if you're into like fun phrases, there's a book I think called How Google Works. And they have a term which maybe has spread throughout corporate America called the HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion. And they said, beware of the HIPPO. And their example is if you have a meeting, the highest paid person's opinion should be shared last, if ever, so that everybody else has a chance to get their idea out. And the boss doesn't sway everybody's stated opinions.
Yeah. HIPPO is pretty good. I think we practice it, yeah.
I was searching my brain for like an example of when someone gives advice of like what to do as opposed to what's true, and when it can like not be great. And it's funny, it's hard to think of one, but one that came across was like this one time I was just walking somewhere, and this guy who was walking his dog, we like made small talk for like 10 seconds before he was like, you should get a dog, man. It'll add so much structure to your life. Like my life was like really chaotic before, but then because I have to like walk him at 6 a.m. and he was like, you know what, it's not even actually about that. You like have a genuine relationship with your dog and love your dog and everything. And I thought like that was a great example of like, yeah, if you're in a certain problem situation, that's the perfect solution, but it might not be. Anyway.
I think for me, like this realization was more stark because I've not been on either side of giving excessive advice or taking excessive advice. I've always been lucky to steer away from either of this thing. But I've witnessed advice givers and receivers, advice givers giving advice like incessantly, like the person who said you should get a dog, to things like you should get married, you should have kids, that are even more like dog. If you made a mistake, it's okay. Yeah. But having a child is not a mistake that I think we should be okay with. Like it shouldn't be a mistake. You should really know that you want to have, or getting married for that matter, or like big decisions in life. And when I ask people, like somebody is frustrated with their life and they will reflect back, oh, I shouldn't have done that and I shouldn't have done that. And I would ask them, like, why did you end up, if you go back and make those decisions at those times? Oftentimes I hear like, oh, that was the prevailing view, or family or friends, like that's what the advice I got, and stuff like that. And so I think that again, but you're right, Carlos. Like if Popper was taught in school and there was a broader culture, a part of like broader culture, like let's say, I don't know, mathematics is, I think that would have been a different situation, and then advice giving might be more okay.
I guess, again, going back to that idea of what ideas you're offering, there's a difference between saying, like, this is possible and an option worth considering, maybe. I can't even tell you that it's worth considering. I can tell you that it exists, and you should consider it to the extent that you're, like, listening to me as I speak it. And,
so that's true.
But yeah,
that's a true statement. And advice, I think, is like you should know, and that's how I would think of advice. Like, hey, I think you should do this. It's like really a claim on. That's what I think of advice as.
Fair enough. In that case, I think there's that general critique of saying, like, yeah, I shouldn't be making your decisions for you. Would be another way of putting that. I think in that framing, if that is your definition, then it's more clear. Like, oh yeah, you shouldn't let other people make your decisions for you. By the way, like, I always like rounding up to the nearest civilizational problem in my conversations. So, like, if I do that here, that's like the political case or the economic thing, where it's like, hey, you shouldn't have some distant politician making decisions about your life, and somebody else giving you advice is basically that. And so, like, that issue of where is the knowledge and where is the decision-making authority is, like, obviously a very central problem when it comes to political philosophy. Like, like, we want to have local government, global government, who has the power, who has the responsibility, who's going to get messed up if the decision is wrong, who has the skin in the game, all that stuff. Like, in that perspective, obviously, like, somebody with no skin in the game is telling you, go get a dog and get married. Same day. How easy that
like
is.
He didn't know anything about me and just like randomly just go get a dog anyway.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know that, like, your bank account is whatever. You should be getting a job, not a dog, or whatever it is. Or you should be finding God. Who knows?
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I get some advice every now and then. There's a knock on the door and they'll tell me, hey, you should listen to me. I'm like, what? We've never met before.
I think, by the way, there's another general concept that I find useful, which is, I think I call it the correspondence between ideas and situations, between, like, hey, in this situation, you should use this idea. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier about this attention and problems and whatever. Like, you have a bunch of options, but when should you use one option versus another? In what situations should I refer to dolphins? Let's say. And so you can think of these two circles. The left circle says, here's all your ideas. And, at any given moment, you can be thinking about one or more of these ideas. So there becomes a question of, which ones should you be thinking about at any given time? And so you can imagine a circle on the right saying, here are all, like, the situations I could be in. One of them is like a lion is chasing you. Another one is you're, like, a little bit hungry. Another one, you're giving a speech to a conference. In different situations, you're going to be needing to do different things. When the lion starts attacking you, you better hope that your brain is set up to ignore everything but running hard. Because if it's not, if you get a little bit too interested in butterflies at that moment, see you in the next life, brother. You get eaten. So you want to have, it's life and death, or just speed to be able to focus on the right things, ignore the other things. So anyway, you can imagine these two big circles and saying, hey, I'm going to look at my concept of dolphins. Okay, so that's in the left circle of my ideas. We got dolphins there. Imagine a point for dolphins. And now draw a line from dolphins to all the points in the right circle and say, hey, in this situation, think of dolphins. If you're going on a trip to the ocean, whatever, okay, dolphins. Let's make a plan to deal with that. But hey, when I'm giving a speech about my career, I don't do dolphins there. Okay, cool. And then you do that for all your ideas. And so in a given situation now, if you look at the right side, you're like, I'm in this situation right now. Let me look to the left and look at the ideas circle. Now there's a line to all the ideas I should be thinking about in that situation. And that's nice. And there's not lines to all these irrelevant things. So I think this is kind of a useful concept ideas, situations, the points in each, and the lines connecting them. There's some kind of correspondence. And if you're a really crappy system, then you just randomly connect everything. You think about dolphins all the time or whatever. But if you're really sophisticated, then you have this categorizations and all sorts of rich structure to how you when you use a particular idea. And that's a general thing. I guess it applies to advice too. Like if I said, hey, in this very specific situation, run from the lion, please. That's the thing to do. But if I just say run away in general, like that's often not the right thing to do. And I've given you very little precision in terms of which situations this particular action is the best one to take. So that's another way of looking at advice. How specific is it? Because it's pretty dubious if you just say, yeah, always use index funds or always do this. Like always. There's no situation that I should be doing anything else. I hope you guys have 3 more hours. We have a bunch of more books to get through. No.
Please, I'm here for it.
Continuing on the advice thing, another thing I'm unfortunately not switching to another book, but what makes Beginning of Infinity very unique is that I feel like David, in a way, in the what is true way, does give a lot more advice than say like Godel, Escher, Bach, or like The Information, or to mention another book like Sapiens, where all of these other books, I feel like they raise very important questions, but don't really provide answers. And what I really appreciated about Beginning of Infinity was that it like straight up just says like, yeah, empiricism is wrong. Fuck empiricism. Do this other thing. And I'm like, yes, thank you for the flowchart. But anyway, so yeah, that's a positive.
You get a lot of bang for your buck when somebody says, it's like impossible to predict certain things.
Yeah.
That conflicts with about 1 trillion things per day.
Yeah.
So if you think about bang for your buck, that's a lot of bang for your buck, where suddenly that little thing makes you raise your eyebrow and go, yeah, no, I'm not buying it. So half the fee.
Yeah. This year, Sachs Global has been, I don't know, there's just a quick thing about, and I'll connect it to what you just said. So Sachs Global and bought Neiman Marcus, that they're large luxury department stores in America, and they've been struggling like any corporate merger. It's a big merger, and there's been lots of predictions all year long in our industry, like this will happen and that'll happen by September, by November, by December, and like 2020, something similar happened. One of our large customers was going through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy situation, and I remember I would have high and low blood pressure based on what kind of predictions I'm reading at what time of the day, and so on and so forth. But this year it was like, now I understand what information I need, is relevant, what's prediction versus explanation. Once I understand that, now like I can separate arguments based on if a person is making a prediction without any explanation, that's just garbage. It could be in Wall Street or whatever. Versus a person on X is just, if it says something about 2 sentences but is well explained and has no followers, that's more useful to me as an information versus a explanation-less prediction by an expert, quote unquote. So yeah, that was.
I guess it's always the case that the expert could have an explanation they're not sharing, but obviously it's difficult to distinguish that case from another that's made up when neither produces any explanation. So you're like, yeah, if you had the explanation, you probably would have told me.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah. I can't imagine why anybody would, withhold unless they have some other motives, in which case, again, I don't want your, that person's advice. If somebody's withholding, I'm just going to say, this is going to happen. Don't ask me why. Well,
by the way, this isn't the same thing exactly, but it was kind of a funny thing that I experienced, which is that there was a set of presentations by biotech companies I went to at my old job. And I remember seeing one of the presentations and thinking, oh, that was pretty cool. Cool technology, whatever it was. And my boss was like scoffing at this presentation when it was over. And I was like, oh, like I'm not having that experience at all. But she was much more senior in the field and understood everything much more than I did. So I was like, what's your reaction there? What's that about? She's like, they didn't show the data. If they had good data, trust me, that's the first thing you show is that our thing works much better than everything else. They didn't show that. That means they don't have that. I was like, oh, okay. So it was just a very quick heuristic of just like, yeah, okay, like, and it's just obvious to her. Anybody with good results would show the good results. That's the thing that's the one thing you would show. They didn't show that. Therefore, I would put millions of dollars. They do not have that data, or like it doesn't work the way they're just hoping. So that's interesting. So when you say like, hey, they didn't give me an explanation, I think that something probably similar is true, where it's like, yeah, 99.999, there is no explanation. There's a vibe. That's I really liked, for instance, speaking of random explanations that are sharp. I liked the first introduction that Elon Musk gave about the Boring Company. He's like, the cost of tunneling is proportional to the cross-sectional area of the tunnel. You go, okay, that makes sense. Like how much volume of earth you have to move and all that. So you make the tunnel smaller, you have to move less dirt. It's cheaper. So first thing we did is we asked, can you make the tunnel smaller? And it turns out the answer is yes. So we're going to do that. Okay. And he says, so that's about, a quarter. Now we've achieved like a 75% reduction in cost or whatever it was. And he said, okay, now to go further than that, you want to do this and this and this. And all that together gets you a 10x reduction in cost. And so you think, oh, okay, this is so simple. Like, of course, there's lots of challenges to make all these things happen, blah, 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 blah. But the core thesis is very, like, you can share it in 5 seconds, and it like takes 5 minutes to lay it all out. You go, okay, if you can do those things, then you will achieve those things. It makes sense. There's no like, oh yeah, I'm speculating. Just like the dirt vibes are in, just tunneling is going to take over. It's obvious. You're like, well, you haven't told me why it's obvious. Why that would win? Blah blah blah.
Of course, it takes a lot of work to come up with those simple explanations. But once you have it, then you can put it in a paragraph. Yeah.
I sometimes think about when I see like a really, really long piece of writing, I'm like, dude, if you had the answer, you would have just told me the answer. You wouldn't talk around the thing.
Yes. Yeah. At least have a TLDR.
Godel, Escher, Bach, cuff.
Yeah. I think people who really have a good explanation typically end up having a short-ish like something, and then you can use like later on, like at least the main idea should be. I don't know. I see that point what you just made, Carlos. Like
we'll make it up in volume. You're like,
yeah.
But you've been writing, Carlos. I mean, do you have that experience now? Like, do you feel that whenever you write something that you can write it concisely, or you can write it really succinctly, consistently?
I mostly tweet.
Oh.
So there you go.
But do you think that it has all the information? Like you're tweeting with the full explanation and everything that everybody would need to read that tweet standalone and kind of pick up the whole thing?
No, that's definitely not true. But yeah, when I have an idea, when I'm reading a book and I have a thought, I can just put that in a tweet, and it can take a while to make what seems to me a simple idea expressed in simple words. So there, sometimes I'll have an idea and I'm like, okay. It's really 2 things. And so when I write it, sometimes I'm like, it sounds like 6 things, but I know it's 2 things. I got to hammer it into 2 things. So it looks like it's 2 things. So that happens a lot. No, but I think in general, when I write in my own personal notes, this is something where I'm trying usually to write a note that is only like 1 screen, like let's say 6 inches of text. And then if there's other issues that are like related to that, they'll have like a separate note that's like linked to it or whatever. But I'm like, if this note is doing its job, it should, of course, many of my notes I'm thinking out loud, and it's like 5,000 words or whatever of BS that you wouldn't want to read. But once I figure it out, things get much shorter. And I think it's actually a very general thing with me. This is maybe inside baseball or whatever. But when I'm working on my notes, sometimes I have these like long chains of thought, and it becomes very easy to edit something once I know the answer, and that, these are the 3 things that matter. If I try to figure something out and just be like let me like organize this 1,000-word thing. It's not so easy until I figure out what the real ideas are. Because once I figure out what the actual answer is, I can say, okay, let me go through every line of the mess. I can see, once I have the answer, where that line either fits into the mess, needs to be in some other note somewhere that's unrelated, or is trash, or I've already covered it. Those decisions are all trivial once I know the actual answer, or like I have a confident picture of things. Until then, it's much harder. Yeah, so I do think that once you understand things get real short, real fast.
Interesting. Did you write a lot before coming into contact with David Deutsch's, material?
Kind of.
Did you have like a public presence, like you're thinking about AGI or anything?
This is the dark ages of the past that I cannot recall. No, I think when I was like in high school or something, I did get a book like on the mind. I think it was from V.S. Ramachandran. He's written many books, and one of them was about just what you can learn from the mind from like patients who have like weird disorders or injuries. And he's like, okay, like this guy got a pipe through his, medulla oblongata, whatever, and now he can read 10 books at a time, or whatever it was. And so there was like a series of those that was kind of just interesting and fun. And I don't know how much that shaped me or whatever, but maybe I'll do like a more in-depth history, like why did I get interested in the AGI angle rather than the aesthetics angle or something else. But
yeah, I'm interested. You're also you're a guitarist, right? You make music, so.
Oh yeah, but we'll have to cover that another time. We'll have to get a new chapter on the epistemology of rock.
Yeah.
But cool. Thanks for everybody. We'll probably wrap it up pretty soon here. Once we get to 90 minutes, I start to imagine everybody's about to have an aneurysm. Too much amazing knowledge creation.
No. Yeah.
But cool. Any other closing comments from you guys?
Just that everyone should go buy a dog. It's super important.
And Carlos, congratulations on that mentioned by David. That was very impressive.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Where he said, "I'm the only one who knows about AGI," or whatever. Cool. It's funny because I like it, but it's also not a statement that I have discovered anything. It's more like, hey, I think you need to know X in order to do Y, and it seems like he knows X, so he's trying to do Y. So that's better than other people who don't know anything about X or thinks X is relevant. So,
sure.
So I'll take it. By the way, I'll close on this, which is maybe to say something which is kind of funny. I don't know if this is sharing something he wouldn't want to share, but I did talk with him once, and I asked something, and he was saying something like, "You might be the one who discovers AGI."
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
And I thought, I don't know if he said this or what was stated, and what I just sort of thought of as my interpretation of that statement. But I think that there's some. It's not advice exactly, but sometimes people will provide encouragement that sort of says, "Oh, you can do this, and you can do it." And usually, like one way of replying to that is like, "Well, why couldn't I?" Like, why are you telling me? Why wouldn't I be able to do it? You have to counteract this assumption that I couldn't do it. So, oh no, you can do it. Do I look weak? What's wrong? So somebody actually once told me, "You speak really good English," and I was like.
It doesn't look like it, but you do.
What's going on here? But I liked David's statement of it because it was less that, and I think it's something he said was something like, "Well, you're interested in the problem, and I think that these are some ideas from Karl Popper, et cetera, that are relevant to the problem, and most people don't have them, and I think you need them to get to the solution." So it seems like you're doing that, and it seems like you're interested in the problem. So what else does one need to solve a problem other than some good ideas to solve it and an interest in doing so? And so that felt quite different from the like, oh, you can do it too. You're a Hispanic or you're a woman. Don't let that stop you. You can. it's just like, oh, like it was more like, of course you can do it because like, yeah, there you go. So I thought that was interesting. And so I guess this is a similar flavor, a restatement of that, of like, hey, Carlos seems to know these ideas and was working on it. And that's more than can be said for people who seem to be working on it, but don't have those Popperian ideas to work with.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Cool. Well, I'll try to have it ready for next week.
Sweet.
Adios, everybody.
Please.
See you guys.
All right. Happy New Year.